By the mid-50s, there's a little bit of a change, and that is because that initial period of time where there's just this flurry of consumption comes to an end. And we have this other period in what we refer to as the post-war era from the mid-50s up until the mid-1960s, which is an era where there is a much more prevalent fear that this high-level consumption is going to end. And so in advertising, we see that there are new emphases on selling products, but also in the products themselves with a new emphasis on design. So during this period of time, it becomes very important to stress the newness of a product. And there are two keys to this. One is that the newness has to be visible. It doesn't matter if you can't see that something is new. You need to be able to see it in order for it to be important, in order to be a powerful motivating force to get people to buy something. You know, if you think back to the dependence effect and all the talk that we had about you have to be able to see these things. Well, newness you have to be able to see. It's not just enough for it to be on the inside. So newness has to be visible, and then also there needs to be planned obsolescence in order to encourage people to keep buying things. All right, so planned obsolescence is something that you might have heard of before. Sometimes people talk about it in terms of the idea that something is built and then it's going to break at a certain point in time. That's not really what planned obsolescence is about. Instead, planned obsolescence is that you're building in certain technological components that are then going to become outdated, or you're going to add new components. So you don't put everything in at one time. You expect people to want to buy it and then buy it again and buy it again a little while later. So planned obsolescence is about adding design that's about just selling a new product or giving new looks, new features to things that people are already familiar with in order to encourage them to buy it again. And you see it really prominently in big ticket items like cars and also home appliances like refrigerators. An emphasis on new looks and new features. So at this period of time, it wasn't uncommon for cars to change drastically from one year to the next. Another element that you see is what's called market segmentation. So if we look at cars, for example, and you think about the market for cars, you have all these people that want a car. Now, you go back to the teens and 20s. Henry Ford's idea was that all Americans would have the same exact car. Well, that is the exact opposite of market segmentation. Market segmentation means you look at all those people that can conceivably be consumers of cars and you put them into different segments and you market different kinds of cars to all of them according to how much money they have to spend, for example. So Harley Earl is a famous person in the car world, and he was head of design for General Motors. And what he did was he's in charge of styling all these different levels of cars, differentiating between the different product levels. And one of the things he's really famous for is adding the big tail fins to cars. In particular, Cadillac is what became famous for having these big tail fins. And they became this element that would differentiate cars from one another. And Cadillac was like the top of the General Motors line of cars. You know, you've got GM and Buick, and you work your way up. Eventually, you get to Cadillac, is the fanciest of the GM cars. So the idea is that you have all these GM customers and you make them customers for life, and their first car they can get, you know, the cheapest one they can afford is maybe just this little Chevrolet, and then ultimately they're working their way up so when they're the most affluent they can buy the Cadillac. So tail fins become that symbol of elegance, of luxury. And what actually happens is that everybody starts putting tail fins on cars and they start getting ridiculously big. They become what's known as a non-price factor. That part of the car that isn't about its price, but that's going to persuade people to buy it. So here's another couple of ads. Edsel is a great example of how advertising can go wrong. So Edsel was actually an imprint of the Ford Motor Company. And Ford spent an unprecedented amount, millions and millions of dollars, marketing the Edsel. They hired J. Walter Thompson, one of the most successful and powerful advertisers agencies for a very long period of time. You read about them before. And they promoted this car, the Edsel, but it was a huge flop. Look at this this particular ad, you can see the approach. Edsel for 1960. It's new, it's nifty, it's thrifty, and every year there's a new kind of Edsel, a new look. And the pictures here are emphasizing looking at the car, all these different angles, how it looks, what it's about. There's even people outside the car looking at the car, besides fitting a bunch of kids in it. On the other hand, we have the Studebaker ad. So in this ad, you can see kind of this emphasis on non-price components and also the sense of conveying some kind of luxury. So one of these cars is called the Commander, one's called the Champion. And it says, Studebaker cars take on a completely new luxury look for 1958. That's the idea of that planned obsolescence and newness, right? That you can see this new luxurious look for 1958 here in the Studebaker President. We're looking at it from the rear. We see these tail fins, and then the one above, the Commander also. The text says it's longer, lower than ever, flight stream roofline, and brilliant Hawk-inspired body styling. Lots of emphasis on being big, new, styling, design. It's all of what the stuff is about. And you're going to see there is, like we see over and over again in advertising, a reaction against this kind of stuff that's going to come up in the 1960s.